Hi, my name is Lily, and 3 months ago my parents drained my entire bank account while I was watching the sunset in Santorini on my honeymoon. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. The most shocking part was watching my husband's cybersecurity team trace their digital footprints in real time, revealing a web of financial manipulation that had been going on for years. I never thought justice would look like lines of code scrolling across a laptop screen, or that betrayal could be measured in timestamps and IP addresses. But sometimes the truth hides in the data, and sometimes family isn't who you think they are. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of my wedding to Ryan Martinez felt like stepping into a fairy tale I never dared to dream. The ceremony was held at Cascade Mountain Lodge, a rustic venue nestled between towering pines and overlooking the Columbia River Gorge. Everything was perfect in that effortless way that only happens when months of planning finally come together. The October air was crisp, golden leaves scattered across the pathway like nature's confetti, and the smell of wood smoke drifted from the lodge's massive stone fireplace. I stood in the bridal suite, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace my grandmother had worn on her wedding day 60 years earlier. The dress was simple but elegant, ivory silk that caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Sophie Chen, my maid of honor and best friend since college, was putting the finishing touches on my hair when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother, Carol Parker. Running a few minutes late, sweetheart. Traffic from Bend was heavier than expected. See you soon. So proud of you today. I smiled, setting the phone aside. My parents had driven down from Bend early that morning, and knowing my father Dennis's habit of stopping at every scenic overlook between their house and Portland, I wasn't surprised they were behind schedule. My older brother Marcus had texted earlier saying he was already at the venue, probably charming the caterers and sampling the appetizers. Sophie stepped back, admiring her handiwork. You look absolutely radiant, Lily. Ryan is going to lose his mind when he sees you walking down that aisle. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the glowing woman staring back at me. The past year had been a whirlwind of wedding planning, but also of building something beautiful with Ryan. We'd met 2 years earlier at a coffee shop in downtown Portland where I was grading papers from my third-grade class. And he was troubleshooting a client's network security remotely. He'd noticed my frustrated sighs over a particularly challenging set of math homework and offered to help explain fractions using coffee shop napkins and sugar packets. By the time I finished grading, we'd been talking for 3 hours. The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped for and more. Ryan stood at the altar in his charcoal gray suit, his dark eyes never leaving mine as I walked down the aisle. My father looked distinguished in his navy suit, his graying hair neatly combed, offering me his arm with the kind of proud smile that made my chest tight with emotion. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her burgundy dress perfectly coordinated with the fall color scheme Isabella Green, our wedding planner, had suggested. The vows we'd written ourselves were simple but heartfelt. Ryan promised to be my partner in all adventures, big and small, and to always make me laugh even when I was grading papers at 11 p.m. I promised to support his dreams of growing SecureNet solutions into something that could protect families and small businesses from digital threats, and to never judge him for staying up until 3 a.m. debugging code. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the kiss was soft and sweet, followed by applause that echoed off the mountains surrounding us. Marcus whistled loudly from the front row, making my mother playfully swat his arm. The reception flowed seamlessly into evening. The lodge's great room had been transformed with string lights and mason jars filled with seasonal flowers. The dinner was locally sourced salmon with roasted vegetables, and the cake was a simple 3-tier vanilla creation with cream cheese frosting that melted on your tongue. During the father-daughter dance, Dennis held me close and whispered, "I'm so happy you found someone who sees how special you are, sweetheart. Ryan's a good man." I remember thinking how grateful I was for my family's support throughout the engagement. They'd been enthusiastic about Ryan from the moment I brought him home for Thanksgiving the year we started dating. My father had spent hours talking with him about cybersecurity and small business protection, while my mother had immediately started planning ways to include him in family traditions. The gift table was overflowing by the end of the night. Envelopes thick with cards and checks, boxes wrapped in silver and white, and a few larger items that people had shipped directly to our apartment. Sophie had volunteered to coordinate with Isabella to ensure everything made it safely to our place while we were on our honeymoon. As the evening wound down, my parents approached Ryan and me near the dessert table where we were saying goodbye to the last few guests. "We have something special for you too," Carol said, pulling an elegant cream-colored envelope from her purse. "We wanted to wait until tonight to give this to you." Dennis nodded, his eyes warm with emotion. "We know how hard you both have worked to save for this trip and get your lives started together. We wanted to contribute something meaningful. I opened the envelope carefully, finding a check that made my breath catch. $25,000, made out to both Ryan and me. It was more money than I'd ever seen on a single check. Mom, Dad, this is too much, I started, but Carol waved away my protests. Nonsense. You're our daughter, and Ryan is family now. We want you to have the honeymoon of your dreams and come home to start your marriage without financial stress. Maybe use some of it for a down payment on a house when you're ready. Ryan squeezed my hand, his voice thick with gratitude. Mr. and Mrs. Parker, this is incredibly generous. We can't thank you enough. Dennis clapped Ryan on the shoulder. Just take care of our girl, son. That's all the thanks we need. The next morning, we deposited the check into our joint savings account at Northwest Community Bank, adding it to the $15,000 we'd already saved for the honeymoon and future house fund. The total balance of $47,000 felt like a fortune to two people in their late 20s just starting their lives together. 3 days later, we were on a plane to Athens, then catching a connecting flight to Santorini. The Greek islands had been Ryan's suggestion after I'd mentioned dreaming of seeing the sunset over the Aegean Sea since I was a little girl watching travel documentaries with my grandmother. Azure Bay Resort was everything the photos had promised and more. Our suite had a private terrace overlooking the caldera, with an infinity pool that seemed to blend seamlessly into the brilliant blue horizon. The walls were traditional Cycladic white with pops of blue that matched the sea, and the bed was dressed in crisp linens that felt like clouds. We spent our first few days in complete bliss. Mornings began with strong Greek coffee and fresh pastries on our terrace, followed by explorations of the narrow cobblestone streets of OIA. We visited ancient ruins, toured local wineries, and spent lazy afternoons by the pool reading and napping in the Mediterranean sun. The food was incredible. We discovered a little taverna called Sunset Terrace where the owner, a weathered man named Dimitri, insisted on serving us his grandmother's moussaka recipe and teaching us basic Greek phrases between courses. Ryan's attempt at pronouncing Evcharisto had Dimitri laughing so hard he nearly spilled wine on a neighboring table. By our fourth day, we'd fallen into an easy rhythm. We'd wake naturally with the sunrise, make love slowly as the light crept across our bed, then venture out to explore a new part of the island. Ryan had been documenting everything with his camera, claiming he wanted to create a photo album for our first anniversary. It was on that fourth evening, as we sat at Taverna Sunset watching the sky transform from gold to pink to deep purple, that my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sophie's name, which was unusual since we'd agreed she'd only call in case of emergency. Hey, Soph, I answered, expecting maybe a question about wedding gift organization or a funny story about something that had happened at school. Lily, I'm so sorry to bother you, but something weird is happening. Her voice was strained, worried, in a way that made my stomach clench. I went to your apartment today to drop off the last of the wedding gifts, and there was a guy from the bank trying to deliver some kind of urgent notice. Ryan looked up from his plate of grilled octopus, sensing the shift in my mood. What kind of notice? I asked, stepping away from our table to hear better over the gentle murmur of other diners. I don't know exactly, but he said something about account irregularities and needing to speak with you immediately. He left his card and said you should call as soon as possible. Lily, he seemed really concerned. My mind raced through possibilities. We'd been careful about notifying the bank of our travel dates and international card usage. We'd even set up alerts for any unusual activity. Okay, I'll call them first thing in the morning, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It's probably just some kind of routine verification thing. But even as I said it, a cold knot was forming in my stomach. Sophie's next words made it worse. Lily, there's something else. I ran into your brother Marcus at the grocery store yesterday, and when I mentioned the bank guy, he got really weird about it. Like, he knew something but didn't want to say what. He just kept saying everything would work out fine and that you shouldn't worry about money stuff on your honeymoon. I walked to the edge of the restaurant's terrace, gripping the white stone railing as I looked out over the darkening sea. What do you mean weird? He was fidgety, wouldn't make eye contact. You know how Marcus usually is, all confident and chatty. This was different. And when I asked if I should try to reach you, he said your parents were handling everything and you didn't need to know until you got back. The knot in my stomach tightened. Why would my parents be handling anything related to my bank account? And why wouldn't they want me to know about it? Sophie, I need you to do me a favor, I said, my mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. Can you drive by my parents' house tomorrow and see if anything seems off? Don't go to the door, just drive by. Of course, but Lily, you're scaring me. What do you think is going on? I didn't know, but every instinct I had was screaming that something was very wrong. When I returned to the table, Ryan immediately noticed the change in my expression. Everything okay? I filled him in on Sophie's call, watching as his expression grew more serious with each detail. As someone who made his living protecting people from digital threats, Ryan's radar for potential problems was highly tuned. "We should call the bank tonight," he said, already pulling out his phone to check the time difference. "It's still business hours in Portland." Within minutes, I was on hold with Northwest Community Bank's after-hours security line, my heart pounding as automated messages cycled through options for reporting fraud and account compromises. When Victoria Wells, the bank's security manager, finally came on the line, her tone was professional but urgent. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm glad you called. We've been trying to reach you about some concerning activity on your joint savings account. There have been several large withdrawals over the past 3 days that we wanted to verify with you." My mouth went dry. "What kind of withdrawals?" "I'm showing 3 separate transactions totaling $38,000. The first was for $15,000 on Tuesday, followed by $12,000 on Wednesday, and $11,000 yesterday. All were made using your debit card and PIN at various ATM locations around Bend, Oregon." The phone felt heavy in my hand. Ryan was watching me intently, and I knew my face must have gone pale because he immediately moved his chair closer to mine. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in Greece. I've been in Greece since Monday. And my debit card is right here in my wallet." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I understand this is distressing. Can you confirm that you're currently in possession of all your cards and that you haven't given your PIN to anyone?" I fumbled through my purse, pulling out my wallet and checking each card slot twice. Everything was there. "Yes, all my cards are here. And I've never given my PIN to anyone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "In that case, Mrs. Martinez, we're looking at a case of identity theft and fraud. I'm going to need to freeze your account immediately and begin an investigation. Can you remain on the line while I pull up the transaction details and ATM camera footage?" Ryan took my free hand, squeezing it gently as I nodded to the phone rep even though she couldn't see me. The sunset we'd been admiring moments earlier now felt like a mockery, all that beauty existing in sharp contrast to the nightmare that was unfolding. "Mrs. Martinez, I have the ATM footage pulled up now, and I need to ask you something sensitive. Do you recognize the person using your card in these transactions?" My heart stopped. "Can you describe them?" "Middle-aged man, approximately 6 feet tall, graying hair, wearing a blue baseball cap and dark jacket." The timestamps show the transactions occurring at 2:17 p.m., 3:45 p.m., and 4:22 p.m. on consecutive days at 3 different ATM locations around Bend. I closed my eyes, the description hitting me like a physical blow. Blue baseball cap. Dark jacket. The same outfit my father had been wearing when he'd helped load wedding gifts into Marcus's truck after the reception. "Mrs. Martinez? Are you still there?" "That's my father," I whispered, the words feeling foreign and impossible as they left my mouth. "You're describing my father." Ryan was already opening his laptop before I finished the call with Victoria Wells. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who lived in the digital world, pulling up secure connections and launching programs I didn't recognize. "We're going to figure this out right now," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority that made him so good at his job. "Alex Thompson from my team is still awake in Portland. He owes me a favor, and this is exactly the kind of digital forensics work he lives for." I sat on the edge of our hotel bed, still wearing the flowing white dress I'd put on for dinner, feeling like I was watching someone else's life implode. The room that had felt like paradise an hour ago now felt like a prison, the beautiful view of the Aegean Sea mocking me through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Within minutes, Ryan had Alex on a video call. Alex was a thin guy with messy brown hair and the kind of intense focus that came from years of tracking cybercriminals. He was sitting in what looked like his home office, multiple monitors glowing behind him. "Lily, I'm really sorry this is happening to you guys," Alex said, adjusting his webcam. "But the good news is that if someone used your debit card, there's going to be a digital trail a mile wide. Bank systems, ATM cameras, even cell phone tower pings. Whoever did this probably thought they were being smart, but they left breadcrumbs everywhere." Ryan shared our screen as I logged into our joint banking account online. The balance that had shown $47,000 4 days ago now displayed $9,000 and change. Seeing it in black and white made my chest tighten with a panic I'd never experienced before. "Alex, walk us through what you're seeing," Ryan said, pulling up the transaction history. Alex leaned closer to his camera, squinting at the shared screen. "Okay, so we have 3 withdrawals over 3 consecutive days, all in Bend, Oregon. Maximum daily withdrawal amounts, which suggests someone who knows banking limits and is trying to avoid triggering additional security protocols. He paused, highlighting the transaction times. But here's what's interesting. These aren't random times. They're all between 2 p.m. and 5 p.m., which is when most people are at work or running errands. It's also when ATM areas tend to have fewer witnesses. I found my voice, though it came out shaky. The bank security manager said they have ATM footage. She described someone who looked exactly like my father. Alex nodded grimly. That's actually good for building a case, but I want to see what else we can find. Ryan, can you pull up your wife's phone records? I want to see if there were any location pings or calls around the time of these transactions. As Ryan navigated to our phone carrier's website, my mind was reeling. How would my father even get my PIN number? I'd never written it down, never shared it with anyone. The only person who might have seen me enter it was. Oh my God, I whispered, the memory hitting me like ice water. The wedding gift money. Ryan looked up from his laptop. What about it? When we deposited my parents' check and the other wedding money, my father came into the bank with us. Remember? He said he wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. And he was standing right behind me when I entered my PIN at the deposit machine. Alex made a note on his screen. That's how he got the PIN. Classic shoulder surfing. But he still needed access to your actual debit card to make the withdrawals, unless. He trailed off, typing rapidly. Ryan, this is where it gets interesting. I'm pulling up ATM transaction data from a database we use for fraud investigations. Give me the exact times and locations of those withdrawals. For the next 20 minutes, Alex walked us through a digital investigation that felt like watching a CSI episode in real time. He pulled up ATM camera footage, cross-referenced cell phone tower data, and even accessed traffic camera feeds from around the withdrawal locations. Here's what I can tell you definitively, Alex said finally, leaning back in his chair. The person making these withdrawals had a physical debit card, not a cloned or skimmed card. The magnetic stripe signature matches your bank's records perfectly. My stomach dropped. But that's impossible. My card is right here. Not impossible, Alex said gently. Just means whoever did this had access to your original card long enough to make a duplicate, or they temporarily borrowed it and returned it without you noticing. Ryan was already pulling up our recent activities on his phone. Lily, think about the last few weeks. When was the last time you used your debit card around your family? I closed my eyes, trying to remember. The rehearsal dinner. The morning of the wedding when I'd stopped for coffee and forgotten my wallet, and my mother had offered to pay. The day before the wedding when we'd all gone out for lunch and. The bridal shower, I said, the memory crystallizing with horrible clarity. 3 weeks ago, at my parents' house. I left my purse in the kitchen while we were opening gifts. Carol wanted me to pay for the catering with my card so they could reimburse me later, and I gave her my whole wallet. Alex nodded grimly. That would have been plenty of time to either clone the card or have a duplicate made. There are machines that can duplicate a magnetic stripe in under 30 seconds. The room felt like it was spinning. I stood up abruptly, walking to the terrace doors and pressing my palms against the cool glass. The fairy lights of OIA twinkled below us like stars, but all I could see were the faces of my parents at our wedding, smiling and hugging us, telling us how proud they were. There's more, Alex said, his voice cutting through my shock. I've been tracking the cell phone data from the ATM locations, and there's something you need to see. He shared his screen, showing a map with red dots marking the 3 ATM locations and blue dots showing cell phone pings. The phone registered to Dennis Parker was at all 3 locations during the withdrawal times. But here's the really damning part: there was a second phone with him at each location. Ryan leaned closer to the screen. Whose phone? Registered to Marcus Parker. Your brother was with your father for every single withdrawal. The betrayal hit me in waves. Not just my father, but Marcus too. My older brother, who had walked me down the aisle during our rehearsal when my father was running late. Who had given a toast at our reception about how Ryan was gaining a sister and he was gaining a brother. Who had hugged me goodbye at the airport and told me to have the most amazing honeymoon. I need to call Sophie, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. She said Marcus was acting weird when she mentioned the bank notice. It was nearly midnight in Greece, which meant it was mid-afternoon in Portland. Sophie answered on the second ring. Lily? How did the bank call go? Sophie, I need you to tell me exactly what Marcus said when you talked to him yesterday. Word for word if you can remember. There was a pause. Okay, but you sound really upset. What's going on? I gave her the condensed version while Ryan and Alex continued their digital investigation in the background. Sophie's sharp intake of breath when I told her about the stolen money told me everything I needed to know about her reaction. Oh, Lily. I'm so sorry. But now that you mention it, Marcus was definitely acting guilty about something. He kept saying things like, everything will work out, and Lily doesn't need to stress about money stuff right now. And when I asked if I should call you, he got really insistent that your parents were handling everything. Did he say anything else? Yeah, actually. He said something about how you'd understand when you got back, and that sometimes families have to make hard decisions for the greater good. I thought he was being overly dramatic, but now. I closed my eyes. Now it sounds like he was trying to rationalize theft. After I hung up with Sophie, Ryan showed me what Alex had discovered during my call. Using his access to various databases, Alex had pulled up financial records that painted a disturbing picture. Your parents' construction business filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 6 months ago, Alex said, scrolling through court documents. They owe over $200,000 to suppliers and subcontractors. The house they're living in is in foreclosure, with a sheriff's sale scheduled for next month. I felt like I was falling through space. But they seemed fine at the wedding. They gave us $25,000. Ryan's expression was grim as he pointed to another document on the screen. Lily, look at this. The check they gave us was from a business account that was already overdrawn. It should have bounced. Alex pulled up the bank records. It didn't bounce because they deposited cash into the business account the morning of your wedding. $15,000 in cash, which exactly matches the amount of your personal savings they stole first. The scope of the deception was staggering. They had stolen my money to give me a wedding gift, then stolen more of my money after the wedding. They had looked me in the eye, hugged me, told me they loved me, all while planning to rob me blind while I was on my honeymoon. There's something else, Alex said, his voice gentler now. I found social media posts from your brother's account. He posted pictures from a weekend trip to Las Vegas 2 days ago. The timestamps match when he should have been working at the job he told you about. Ryan pulled up Marcus's Instagram account on his phone. There were photos of him at casino tables, expensive dinners, and what looked like a high-end hotel suite. The most recent post was from that morning, showing him at a spa with the caption, "Sometimes you need to treat yourself. Life's too short for regrets." I stared at the screen, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't a desperate family making hard choices. This was calculated theft, funded by money stolen from me and used for luxury and gambling. Alex, what are our legal options? Ryan asked. With this much evidence, it's a clear-cut case of identity theft and financial fraud. The ATM footage, the phone records, the financial trail, it's all admissible in court. You could file criminal charges and civil suits for recovery of the funds. I walked back to the terrace, sliding open the door and stepping into the warm Greek night. The Aegean stretched out endlessly before me, dark water reflecting the moon and stars. 24 hours ago, I had been blissfully happy, planning which beaches to visit and which restaurants to try. Now I was learning that my own family had been systematically stealing from me. Ryan joined me on the terrace, wrapping his arms around me from behind. What do you want to do? I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him anchoring me in a world that suddenly felt completely unstable. I want to confront them. I want to look them in the eye and ask them how they could do this. We can fly back early, Ryan offered. Cancel the rest of the honeymoon and deal with this immediately. I turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the moonlight. No. They've already stolen our money. I'm not letting them steal our honeymoon too. But I want to call them tonight. I want to hear what they have to say when they think I don't know what they've done. Back inside, Alex was still working, building what he called a comprehensive evidence package that would be impossible for anyone to deny or explain away. Before you call them, Alex said, let me set up a recording system that will capture everything legally. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations you're part of without telling the other person. As Alex walked us through the recording setup, I felt something shifting inside me. The initial shock and heartbreak were crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. My parents had made the calculation that I was weak, that I would accept whatever explanation they gave me, that family loyalty would prevent me from fighting back. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I dialed my parents' home number at 2 a.m. Greek time, which was 6 p.m. in Oregon. Carol answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Lily, sweetheart. How's the honeymoon? Are you having the most wonderful time? The casual warmth in her voice, as if she hadn't spent the past 3 days systematically stealing from me, was more infuriating than any anger could have been. Mom. We're having a great time, thanks. Listen, I got a strange call from the bank today about some account activity. They said there were some large withdrawals made with my debit card in Bend. Do you know anything about that? There was the briefest pause, so short I might have imagined it. Oh, that's odd. Large withdrawals? What kind of amounts are we talking? About $38,000 over 3 days, Mom. Another pause, longer this time. 38,000? That's almost all your wedding money. Lily, that's terrible. Have you called the police? The performance was flawless. The shock in her voice sounded completely genuine. If I hadn't been watching Alex's screens showing the proof of her husband's and son's guilt, I might have believed her. Not yet. I wanted to check with family first to see if anyone knew anything. The bank said the withdrawals were made by someone who looked like Dad. Your father? Lily, that's ridiculous. Dennis has been working on the Morrison project all week. He's barely left the house except to go to the job site. I looked at Ryan, who was monitoring the recording levels and nodding. That everything was being captured clearly. Mom, can you put Dad on the phone? I'd like to ask him directly. Of course, honey. Dennis, come here. Lily needs to talk to you about something with the bank. I heard muffled conversation in the background, then my father's voice came on the line, deeper and more cautious than my mother's had been. Hey, sweetheart. Your mom says someone's been using your bank card? That's awful. Have you canceled it yet? Dad, the bank has ATM footage of the person who used my card. They described someone who looks exactly like you. Blue baseball cap. Dark jacket, about your height and build. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, become flatter and more careful. Lily, I don't know what to tell you. I've been working all week. Ask anyone at the Morrison site. I've got time cards, witnesses. What about Marcus? Was he with you? Another long pause. Marcus? Why would you ask about Marcus? Because the bank records show 2 phones at each ATM location. One registered to you and one registered to him. I heard what sounded like a chair scraping against the floor, then hushed voices arguing in the background. When my father came back on the line, his tone had shifted again, becoming defensive and slightly aggressive. Lily, I think you need to be very careful about making accusations. Family is the most important thing in the world, and once you say certain things, you can't take them back. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Ryan's jaw tightened as he listened, and Alex was typing furiously, documenting every word. Dad, I'm not making accusations. I'm asking questions about stolen money. My money. Money that was supposed to help Ryan and me start our life together. Nobody stole anything from you, Lily. Sometimes family members help each other out during difficult times. That's what families do. Help each other out? By taking money without asking? While I'm on my honeymoon? My mother's voice came through the background, sharp and angry. Tell her about the business, Dennis. Tell her why we needed the money. Carol, shut up, my father snapped, but it was too late. Your father's business is in trouble, my mother said, apparently taking the phone back from him. We're about to lose everything, Lily. The house, the business, all of it. We needed that money to make the mortgage payment and keep the bank from foreclosing. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Finally, the truth was coming out. So you did take my money. We borrowed it, my mother corrected. We're going to pay it back as soon as the business situation stabilized. Without asking. While I was on my honeymoon. Using a duplicate of my debit card. We didn't want to worry you during your special time, she said, her voice taking on a pleading quality. We thought we could handle everything and have the money back in your account before you even noticed. Ryan was shaking his head in disbelief. Even for someone who dealt with cybercriminals professionally, the casual way my parents were admitting to identity theft seemed to shock him. Mom, that's called stealing. Taking someone's money without permission is theft, regardless of your intentions. Don't you dare talk to your mother that way, my father's voice came through the phone, angry now. We raised you, fed you, put you through college. We gave you everything you ever needed. The least you can do is help us when we're in trouble. By lying to me? By stealing from me? We gave you $25,000 for your wedding, my mother added. Doesn't that count for anything? I almost laughed at the absurdity. You gave me my own money as a wedding gift. You stole $15,000 from my account to write that check. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, my father spoke, his voice cold and final. Lily, you have a choice to make. You can be a part of this family, or you can be the kind of person who destroys her own parents over money. But you can't be both. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. Choose family loyalty or choose justice. Choose to enable their theft or choose to stand up for myself. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Dad, I choose justice. I choose protecting myself and my husband from people who would steal from us and then try to make us feel guilty about it. I choose accountability. Lily, you're making a mistake, my mother said, her voice shaking. Family is forever. Money comes and goes, but family is forever. You're right, Mom. Family is forever. But theft is also a choice, and consequences are also forever. I hung up the phone and looked at Ryan and Alex, who were both staring at me with expressions of amazement and respect. Well, Alex said finally, that was one of the most thorough confessions I've ever heard anyone record. They admitted to everything: identity theft, financial fraud, even the motive. This case is going to be easier to prosecute than a parking ticket. Ryan pulled me into his arms, kissing the top of my head. I'm so proud of you. That took incredible courage. As I stood there in our hotel room, looking out at the peaceful Aegean Sea, I realized that something fundamental had changed inside me during that phone call. For years, I had been conditioned to prioritize family harmony over my own well-being, to accept less than I deserved in order to keep the peace. But watching Alex's screens full of evidence, hearing the casual way my parents admitted to stealing from me, understanding that they had planned this betrayal while smiling at my wedding, had burned away every illusion I'd ever held about unconditional family love. They had made their choice when they decided to steal from me. Now I was making mine. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. The Mediterranean sunlight was streaming through our terrace doors, casting geometric patterns across the white linens, but the peaceful atmosphere felt surreal after the previous night's revelations. Ryan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his laptop open, his dark hair messy from sleep but his expression focused and alert. 17 missed calls, I said, checking my phone. All from my family. Ryan looked up from his screen. Alex has been working all night. Wait until you see what he found. Within minutes, we were back on a video call with Alex, who looked like he hadn't slept but was buzzing with the energy of someone who had just cracked a major case. His desk was covered with empty coffee cups and scattered papers, and behind him I could see multiple monitors displaying various databases and tracking programs. Good morning from the digital crime scene, Alex said, his voice slightly hoarse but excited. I hope you're sitting down, because what I discovered is going to blow your minds. He shared his screen, showing what looked like a complex flowchart, with dates, transactions, and connections drawn between different accounts and individuals. After your phone call last night, I decided to dig deeper into your family's financial history. What I found suggests this wasn't a desperate, last-minute decision to steal your money. This was a planned operation that's been in the works for months. The first document he pulled up was a series of bank statements from Dennis Parker's business account, going back 8 months. Red highlights marked dozens of transactions, each one representing money flowing out faster than it was coming in. Your father's construction business started having serious cash flow problems last December, Alex explained. But instead of cutting expenses or seeking legitimate business loans, he started what I can only describe as a Ponzi scheme using family members. The next screen showed a timeline that made my stomach turn. In January, Dennis had borrowed $15,000 from Marcus, supposedly for new equipment. In February, he'd taken out a loan against my grandmother's estate trust fund, which he was managing as executor. In March, he'd convinced my Aunt Linda to invest in a business expansion opportunity that never existed. Each time, he used money from the new source to pay back the previous loan, keeping everyone happy and unaware that the business was failing, Alex continued. But by May, he was running out of family members to borrow from. Ryan leaned forward, studying the screen. So Lily's wedding money wasn't a desperate grab. It was the next logical step in a pattern. Exactly. And here's the really disturbing part. Alex pulled up another document, this one showing internet search history recovered from Dennis's computer. 3 weeks before your wedding, your father was researching how to duplicate magnetic stripe cards and clone debit cards. He also looked up ATM withdrawal limits and how to avoid triggering bank security alerts. I felt sick. While I had been excitedly planning my wedding, addressing invitations, and choosing flowers, my father had been researching how to steal from me. There's more, Alex said grimly. I found email exchanges between your father and Marcus about what they called the wedding opportunity. They were planning this theft before you even sent out invitations. He scrolled through email printouts that read like a criminal conspiracy. Messages discussing the best time to duplicate my card, how to space out the withdrawals to avoid detection, and even contingency plans for what to say if I discovered the theft early. One email from Marcus to Dennis particularly stood out: she'll never suspect us. Lily always wants to believe the best about family. Even if she figures it out, she won't press charges. She's too loyal for that. The casual confidence with which my brother had predicted my reaction was perhaps the most painful part of all. They hadn't just stolen my money, They'd relied on my love for them to protect them from consequences. Alex, please tell me you forwarded all of this to the authorities, Ryan said. Already done. I sent everything to Detective Sarah Morrison at Portland PD's Financial Crimes Unit, along with Agent Jennifer Kim at the FBI's Cybercrime Division. Between the identity theft, the interstate nature of the fraud, and the amount of money involved, this case is going to get serious attention. My phone started buzzing again. This time it was Marcus calling. I looked at Ryan and Alex, both of whom nodded encouragingly. Put it on speaker and keep recording, Alex suggested. Let's see what his strategy is going to be. I answered the call, my voice deliberately calm. Marcus. Lily, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Mom and Dad told me about your conversation last night, and I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. The concerned, caring tone in his voice was so familiar, so reminiscent of countless conversations we'd had over the years when he'd helped me through problems or offered advice. Hearing it now, knowing what I knew about his involvement, felt like being slapped. What kind of misunderstanding, Marcus? Look, I know how it must have looked with the bank stuff, but you have to understand the situation Dad was in. The business was about to go under, and if that happened, Mom and Dad would have lost everything. Their house, their retirement, everything they've worked for their whole lives. I exchanged glances with Ryan, who was taking notes on everything Marcus was saying. So you thought stealing from me was the solution? It wasn't stealing, Lily. It was a family emergency loan. Dad was going to pay you back as soon as the Morrison contract came through. That's a $40,000 job, and it would have covered everything with interest. Marcus, stop lying to me. I know you were with Dad at the ATMs. I know you helped plan this weeks before the wedding. I know about the Las Vegas trip you took with my money. The silence on the other end was telling. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice had changed, become harder and more defensive. You had that information investigated? You actually hired someone to spy on your own family? I married a cybersecurity expert, Marcus. He has colleagues who specialize in financial fraud. It wasn't exactly hard to trace. So you're going to destroy your own family over money? You're going to send your father to prison because he was trying to save his business? The manipulation was so blatant it was almost impressive. In a matter of seconds, Marcus had tried to make me the villain for discovering their crime and seeking accountability for it. I'm going to hold my family accountable for stealing from me, I corrected. What happens after that depends on choices you and Dad make going forward. Lily, think about what you're doing. Once you involve the police, once you press charges, there's no going back. Is money really worth destroying your relationship with your parents forever? Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand, giving me strength for what I needed to say next. Marcus, my relationship with my parents was destroyed the moment they decided to steal from me. I didn't destroy it by discovering the theft. They destroyed it by committing the theft. You're being incredibly selfish, Marcus snapped, his mask finally slipping completely. You have a good job, a husband with money, no kids to support. You don't need that money the way Mom and Dad do. They're facing bankruptcy, and you're worried about some wedding fund? You know what, Marcus? You're right. I am worried about money that I worked for, saved for, and plan to use to build a life with my husband. I'm worried about being able to trust the people who are supposed to love me. I'm worried about what other financial crimes you and Dad have committed that I don't know about yet. Other crimes? Lily, you're being dramatic. Am I? Tell me about Grandma's trust fund. Tell me about the money you borrowed from Aunt Linda. Tell me about all the other family members you've been using to prop up Dad's failing business. Another long silence. Marcus was clearly realizing that I knew far more than he'd anticipated. How did you? Who told you about that? The same digital investigation that caught you stealing from me. Did you really think this wouldn't all come out eventually? Did you think you could just keep stealing from family members indefinitely? We were going to pay everyone back, Marcus said, but his voice had lost all its earlier confidence. The Morrison job was going to fix everything. There is no Morrison job, is there, Marcus? That's just another lie to keep the scheme going a little longer. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Lily, please, don't do this. Dad made some bad decisions, but he's a good man. Mom doesn't deserve to lose her house over this. Can't we work something out privately? I'll get the money together somehow. I'll make this right. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the old instinct to protect my family even when they'd hurt me. But then I looked at Ryan's laptop screen, still showing all the evidence of their calculated betrayal, and the moment passed. Marcus, the time to make this right was before you stole from me. The time to work something out was before you planned this theft for weeks while watching me plan my wedding. You made your choices. now I'm making mine. Lily, please. I'm done with this conversation. If you want to talk again, you can do it through my lawyer. I hung up and immediately felt both relief and sadness wash over me. Relief that I'd stood my ground, sadness that it had come to this at all. You did great, Ryan said, pulling me close. That was incredibly difficult, and you handled it perfectly. Alex was busy on his computer, typing rapidly. I'm forwarding that recording to the investigators too. Marcus just admitted to knowledge of the scheme and to your father's other financial crimes. Plus, his offer to get the money together somehow could be interpreted as an admission of guilt. The rest of the morning was spent coordinating with law enforcement and beginning the process of filing formal charges. Detective Morrison called to confirm that arrest warrants were being prepared for both Dennis and Marcus Parker. Agent Kim explained that the federal charges would likely include wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering, given the pattern of using family relationships to commit financial crimes. The good news, Detective Morrison said during our conference call, is that we should be able to recover most of your money. Oregon has strong victim restitution laws, and we've already frozen your father's business accounts and personal assets. What about the house? I asked. My parents are facing foreclosure. That's going to be complicated, the detective admitted. If they used stolen money to make mortgage payments, those payments could be considered part of the criminal proceeds. The bank might have to reverse those payments, which would accelerate the foreclosure timeline. After we ended the call with law enforcement, Ryan and I sat quietly on our terrace, looking out at the endless blue of the Aegean Sea. The contrast between the beauty of our surroundings and the ugliness of the situation back home felt surreal. Are you okay? Ryan asked gently. I thought about the question seriously before answering. I think I am, actually. I'm sad, obviously. I'm angry about what they did and how they did it. But I don't feel guilty about pressing charges, if that's what you're asking. Good. You shouldn't feel guilty. What they did was inexcusable. I keep thinking about that email where Marcus said I'd never press charges because I'm too loyal. Like my loyalty was a weakness they could exploit. Ryan nodded thoughtfully. Maybe they confused loyalty with being a pushover. Real loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse or criminal behavior. Real loyalty means holding the people you love accountable for their actions. That afternoon, we made a decision that felt both defiant and healing. Instead of cutting our honeymoon short to deal with the crisis, we chose to stay and reclaim our time together. We turned off our phones for the rest of the day and focused on each other and the beautiful place we were visiting. We took a boat tour around the volcanic islands, swimming in hot springs and exploring hidden coves accessible only by water. We visited the ancient ruins of Akrotiri, a Bronze Age city preserved in volcanic ash, and talked about the perspective that comes from seeing civilizations that rose and fell thousands of years before our current problems existed. That evening, we had dinner at a small taverna built into the cliffside, accessible only by a narrow stone staircase that wound down from the main road. The owner, an elderly woman named Maria, served us fresh seafood caught that morning by her son, along with vegetables from her garden and wine made from grapes grown on her property. You are on honeymoon, she asked in accented English, noting our wedding rings. Yes, Ryan replied. We got married a week ago. Maria beamed and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a bottle of champagne that she insisted was for the new marriage, no charge. As we sat there, watching the sun set over the caldera while sipping champagne given to us by a stranger who wanted nothing more than to celebrate our happiness, I felt something shift inside me. The anger and betrayal were still there, but they were balanced now by gratitude for what I had gained rather than just grief for what I had lost. You know what's strange? I said to Ryan as we walked back to our hotel hand in hand. I feel more married now than I did after the ceremony. What do you mean? The wedding was beautiful, but it was also about families coming together and public vows and all the external stuff. But this week, dealing with this crisis together, it feels like we've really become a team. Like we're really building something together that's separate from where we came from. Ryan stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. In the moonlight. Lily, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with your family, whatever legal battles we have to fight, whatever financial recovery we have to deal with, we're going to do it together. Your problems are my problems now, and my resources are your resources. Ryan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because that's what marriage means to me. It means we face the world as a united front, and we protect each other from anyone who tries to hurt us. Even when the people trying to hurt us are my own family? Especially then. Family is supposed to protect you, not exploit you. When they fail at that job, it becomes my job. The next day brought more phone calls from various family members who had heard about the arrests. My Aunt Linda called too. apologized for not warning me about Dennis's financial requests, explaining that she'd started to suspect something was wrong but hadn't wanted to believe it. My cousin Jennifer called to say she'd always thought there was something off about how Marcus could afford his lifestyle on his supposed salary. Most surprisingly, my grandmother called from her assisted living facility in Eugene. At 86. Her mind was still sharp, and she'd heard about Dennis's arrest from another resident whose grandson worked for the sheriff's department. "Lily, dear, I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up to that son of mine," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through the Depression and 2 wars. "Dennis always had a tendency toward taking shortcuts, even as a boy. I've been worried about what he might do when his business started failing. Grandma, I hate that this is happening to the family." "Sweetheart, this isn't happening to the family. This is Dennis reaping what he sowed. You didn't cause this crisis by discovering it. You're just the one brave enough to demand accountability." Her words carried a weight that helped settle something inside me. If my 86-year-old grandmother, who had known my father his entire life, could see this situation clearly, then I knew I was making the right choice. The arrests happened while we were having breakfast on our terrace on our 7th day in Greece. Detective Morrison called to let us know that both Dennis and Marcus had been taken into custody at 6 a.m. Pacific time, and that they were being held pending arraignment. "Your father tried to run," the detective told us. Neighbors reported seeing him loading suitcases into his truck at 4 in the morning. "We caught him at a gas station about 40 miles outside Bend, heading toward the Idaho border." The image of my father trying to flee rather than face the consequences of his actions was somehow more damaging to my remaining illusions about him than even the theft itself. It showed a level of cowardice and selfishness that was impossible to rationalize away. Marcus, on the other hand, had been arrested at his apartment, apparently unaware that charges were being filed. According to the detective, he'd seemed genuinely shocked that I had followed through on pressing charges. "He kept asking if there was some way to work this out without involving the courts," Detective Morrison said. "I think he really believed you'd change your mind." That afternoon, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up the phone. "Lily, they arrested your father and brother." Her voice was hollow, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. "I know, Mom. How could you do this to your own family? How could you send your father to jail?" The question that had haunted me for days suddenly seemed easy to answer. "Mom, I didn't send Dad to jail. Dad sent Dad to jail when he decided to steal from me. I just refused to cover for him." "But he's your father. He raised you, loved you, provided for you your whole life." "Yes, he did. And that makes what he did worse, not better. He didn't steal from a stranger. He stole from his daughter, on her honeymoon, after giving her a wedding gift made from her own money. How is that love?" There was a long pause before my mother spoke again, her voice smaller and more fragile. "The house is going into foreclosure next week. I'm going to lose everything." For a moment, I felt the old urge to fix things, to offer help, to make the pain go away. But then I remembered Alex's evidence timeline, showing how my parents had been systematically defrauding family members for months while living beyond their means and lying about their situation. "Mom, you and Dad made financial decisions that led to this situation long before you stole from me. Taking my money was never going to solve your underlying problems. It was just going to delay the inevitable while making me a victim too. So you're just going to let me become homeless? I'm going to let you face the natural consequences of yours and Dad's financial decisions. Just like Ryan and I are facing the consequences of having our savings stolen. We're your parents, Lily. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It means everything to me, Mom. That's why this hurts so much. But being my parents doesn't give you the right to steal from me. It actually makes it worse that you did." After I hung up, I sat quietly with Ryan on our terrace, watching fishing boats return to the harbor below as the sun began to set on our last full day in Santorini. "Do you think I'm being too harsh?" I asked. Ryan considered the question carefully before answering. "I think you're being exactly as harsh as someone needs to be when their own parents steal from them and then try to make them feel guilty for seeking justice. Your parents created this situation. You're just refusing to enable it to continue." That night, we had dinner at Dimitri's Taverna one last time. He remembered us from our previous visits and insisted on preparing his special lamb dish, slow-cooked with herbs from his garden. Over the course of the meal, I found myself telling him about the situation with my family, speaking in the careful way you do when explaining something painful to someone who doesn't share your cultural context. Dimitri listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, refilling our wine glasses and looking out at the darkening sea. "In Greece, we have a saying," he finally said. "Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family." Your parents, they forgot this truth. They chose money over loyalty to you. He paused, choosing his words carefully in his second language. Sometimes, when people show you who they really are, you must believe them. Even when it hurts. Even when they are family. As we walked back to our hotel for the last time, I realized that our honeymoon, which had begun as a celebration of new love, had become something much more significant. It had become the place where I learned to choose my own well-being over family dysfunction, where I discovered that I was strong enough to demand accountability even when it was painful, and where I began to understand the difference between loyalty and enabling. Tomorrow, we would fly back to Portland to face whatever legal battles and family drama awaited us. But tonight, I felt more at peace than I had since this whole nightmare began. I had made my choice, and I could live with the consequences. The flight back to Portland felt longer than the one to Athens, weighed down by the knowledge of what waited for us at home. Ryan and I had spent our last morning in Santorini packing slowly, both reluctant to leave the sanctuary our hotel room had become. The place where we'd first learned about the theft now felt like a war room where we'd planned our strategy and found our strength. As our plane descended through the gray Oregon clouds, I caught my first glimpse of Mount Hood in the distance. And felt a complex mix of homesickness and dread. This was still my home, but it would never feel the same again. Sophie was waiting at baggage claim with a sign that read, "The Newlyweds," in bright pink letters, but her smile faltered when she saw our faces. We'd texted her basic updates throughout the week, but seeing us in person made the reality of the situation hit her differently. "You guys look exhausted," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I said, and meant it. "But ready to get this legal stuff started." During the drive to our apartment, Sophie filled us in on the local reaction to the arrests. The story had made the Bend Bulletin's front page, and social media was buzzing with reactions from people who knew our family. "Most people are supportive of you," Sophie said, navigating Portland's late afternoon traffic. "But there are definitely some family friends who think you went too far. Mrs. Henderson from your mom's book club posted something about how young people today don't understand family loyalty." Ryan snorted from the back seat. "Yeah, because family loyalty apparently means letting your parents steal from you without consequences." Our apartment felt strange when we walked in, like returning to a place you'd lived in a previous life. The wedding gifts we hadn't opened yet were stacked neatly on the dining room table, thanks to Sophie's organization. Cards and packages from relatives who had no idea that two members of the family they were celebrating were now in jail. The answering machine was blinking with 17 messages. I played them while unpacking, listening to a mix of reporters asking for comments, relatives asking what was happening, and 3 hang-ups that I suspected were from my mother. The most disturbing message was from my Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother, who lived in Seattle. His voice was tense and angry as he demanded that I call him back immediately to discuss this family situation before it gets completely out of hand. "He sounds pissed," Ryan observed. "Robert always thought Dad could do no wrong," I said. "He's probably convinced this is all some kind of misunderstanding that I'm blowing out of proportion." I was right. When I called Robert back, he launched into an immediate attack. "Lily, what the hell do you think you're doing? Dad and Marcus are sitting in jail cells because you couldn't handle a family loan like an adult." "Uncle Robert, it wasn't a loan. They stole $38,000 from my bank account using a cloned debit card while I was on my honeymoon." "Oh, come on. Your dad was going to pay you back as soon as his business situation stabilized. You know he's always been good for his debts." I looked at Ryan, who was listening on speaker and shaking his head in disbelief. "Robert, did you know that Dad's business filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago? Did you know he's been borrowing money from family members for almost a year, using each new loan to pay back the previous one?" There was a pause. That's not what he told me." "What did he tell you?" "He said business was slow but that he had some big contracts coming in. He said you were being unreasonable about a temporary family loan and that you were threatening to press charges over a misunderstanding." It was clear that my father had been spinning the story to make himself look like the victim of an ungrateful daughter rather than a criminal who had been caught stealing. "Robert, I have bank records, ATM footage, email exchanges, and phone recordings that prove this was a premeditated theft planned weeks in advance. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a family loan. This was identity theft and financial fraud." Another long pause. When Robert spoke again, his voice was smaller and more uncertain. "Email exchanges? What kind of email exchanges?" "Emails between Dad and Marcus planning how to duplicate my debit card, when to make the withdrawals, and what to say if I discovered the theft early. There's one where Marcus specifically says I won't press charges because I'm too loyal to family." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if Robert had hung up. "Robert? Are you still there?" "I'm here." This is a lot to process. Your dad borrowed $5,000 from me last month. He said it was for equipment repairs. Did he pay you back? No. He said the check was coming next week, but next week never came, did it? No. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. Lily, if what you're saying is true, then I'm not just his victim, I'm his enabler. I've been helping him maintain the lie. You couldn't have known, Robert. He's been lying to everyone. After I hung up with Robert, Ryan and I spent the evening opening wedding gifts and trying to return to some semblance of normal life. It felt surreal to be reading cards congratulating us on our marriage while simultaneously dealing with the legal fallout from my family's crimes. The next morning, I met with James Rodriguez, the lawyer Alex had recommended. His office was in a sleek downtown building with a view of the Willamette River, and he had the kind of confidence that came from years of successfully prosecuting financial crimes. I've reviewed all the evidence your husband's colleague provided, Rodriguez said, spreading files across his conference table. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of family financial fraud I've ever seen. The digital trail alone would be enough to convict, but combined with the recorded confessions, we have an airtight case. He walked me through the charges that were being filed. Dennis was facing federal wire fraud charges, state identity theft charges, and multiple counts of theft for the other family members he defrauded. Marcus was charged as an accomplice to the identity theft and wire fraud, plus separate charges for his role in the conspiracy. What kind of sentences are we looking at? I asked. For your father, probably 3 to 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution to all victims. For your brother, likely 2 to 3 years. The sentences could be reduced if they cooperate fully and accept plea agreements. And restitution? We'll recover your money, plus interest and legal fees. Oregon's victim compensation laws are quite strong. The challenge will be collecting from defendants who may not have significant assets remaining. That afternoon, I drove to Bend for the arraignment hearing. It was the first time I'd been back to my hometown since the wedding, and everything looked different through the lens of what I now knew about my family's financial situation. The courthouse was a modern building made of local stone, designed to blend with the high desert landscape. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, wearing a simple black dress and carrying a folder of victim impact statements that Rodriguez had helped me prepare. When they brought my father into the courtroom, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, his hair was unkempt, and he was wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow and unhealthy. He glanced around the courtroom until his eyes found mine, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the space that had opened between us. I'd expected to feel anger or sadness when I saw him, but what I actually felt was a strange kind of detachment. This man who had stolen from me, lied to me, and tried to manipulate me into covering for his crimes felt like a stranger wearing my father's face. Marcus looked younger and more scared than Dennis, his usual confidence completely gone. He kept looking toward the back of the courtroom where my mother was sitting, her face red from crying. The arraignment itself was brief and procedural. Both defendants entered not guilty pleas through their court-appointed attorneys, and bail was set at $50,000 for Dennis and $30,000 for Marcus. Given their financial situation, it was unlikely they'd be able to post bail. As we filed out of the courtroom, my mother approached me in the hallway. She looked like she'd aged years in the past week, her hair disheveled and her clothes wrinkled. Lily, please. Can we talk? I looked at Rodriguez, who nodded slightly. We found a quiet corner near the courthouse's main entrance, away from the reporters who had gathered outside. I know you're angry, my mother began, but your father is a good man who made some bad decisions. He doesn't deserve to go to prison. Mom, good men don't systematically steal from their families while lying about their financial situation. He was desperate. The business was failing, and he didn't know what else to do. He could have asked for help. He could have been honest about the situation. He could have filed for bankruptcy and started over. Instead, he chose to commit crime. My mother's composure cracked, and tears started flowing down her cheeks. I'm going to lose everything, Lily. The house, the car, everything we've worked for our whole lives. I didn't know what your father was doing until it was too late. For a moment, I felt the old urge to comfort her, to find some way to make her pain go away. But then I remembered all the evidence showing that this had been going on for months, all the family members who had been defrauded, all the lies they'd told while planning to steal from me. Mom, I'm sorry you're going through this. I really am. But the consequences you're facing are the result of choices Dad made, not choices I made. I didn't create this situation by discovering it. But you could end it. You could drop the charges and work something out privately. No, I can't. This isn't just about me anymore. Dad stole from Grandma's trust fund, from Aunt Linda, from Uncle Robert, probably from other people we don't even know about yet. Someone has to hold him accountable, or he'll just keep doing it. My mother looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of hurt and something that might have been hatred. I don't know who you've become, Lily. The daughter I raised would never destroy her own family like this. The accusation hit harder than I'd expected, but I forced myself to respond calmly. The daughter you raised believed that family meant love and protection and honesty. When family means theft and lies and manipulation, then maybe it's time to become someone different. That evening, Ryan and I had dinner at a restaurant in downtown Portland, trying to process the emotional weight of the day. The arraignment had made everything feel more real and final. There was no going back now, no possibility of working things out privately or pretending this had all been a misunderstanding. How are you feeling? Ryan asked as we shared a bottle of wine and watched the city lights reflect on the river. Relieved, actually. I was worried that seeing them in court would make me want to drop the charges, but it didn't. If anything, it confirmed that I'm doing the right thing. Any regrets? I thought about the question seriously before answering. I regret that it came to this. I regret that my parents chose to steal from me rather than ask for help. I regret that my brother chose to help them do it. But I don't regret holding them accountable for their choices. Over the next few weeks, the legal process moved forward with mechanical efficiency. Dennis and Marcus both hired private attorneys, presumably funded by relatives who still believed in their innocence. Their lawyers filed various motions challenging the evidence and seeking to have charges reduced or dismissed. None of it worked. Alex's digital forensics were too thorough, the recorded confessions too damning, and the pattern of fraud too extensive to explain away. The plea negotiations began in early November. Dennis's attorney reached out to Rodriguez to discuss the possibility of a deal that would avoid a lengthy trial. They're offering to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and a 2-year sentence, Rodriguez told me during a phone call. He would serve 18 months in minimum security prison and 6 months in a halfway house. What about Marcus? Similar deal. Guilty plea to conspiracy charges, full restitution, 18 months total with most of it served as house arrest and community service. And if we don't accept the plea deals? Then we go to trial, which we'll almost certainly win, and they'll likely get longer sentences. But trials are expensive and emotionally draining, and there's always some small risk of an unexpected outcome. I discussed it with Ryan that night, weighing the practical benefits of avoiding a trial against my desire to see both of them face the full consequences of their actions. What does your gut tell you? Ryan asked. That I want this to be over. I want to get our money back and move on with our lives without having to relive this whole thing in a public trial. Then let's accept the plea deals. The day of the plea hearing was gray and rainy, typical November weather in Oregon. I sat in the same courtroom where the arraignment had been held, listening as Dennis and Marcus each stood before the judge and formally admitted their guilt. Dennis Parker, you are pleading guilty to wire fraud and identity theft. Do you understand? That you are admitting to using deceptive means to obtain money belonging to your daughter and other family members? Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that this plea agreement requires you to pay full restitution to all victims, including interest and legal fees? Yes, Your Honor. When it was Marcus's turn, his voice was barely audible as he admitted to conspiracy and theft charges. He glanced back at me once during his plea, but I kept my expression neutral and looked straight ahead. The judge accepted both plea agreements and scheduled sentencing for the following month. As we left the courthouse, Rodriguez explained what would happen next. The restitution payments will begin immediately. We've already identified assets that can be liquidated to cover most of what they owe you. You should have your money back within 60 days. What about the other victims? They'll be compensated too, though it may take longer if the defendants don't have enough liquid assets. The court can garnish wages and attach future earnings if necessary. That afternoon, I drove past my childhood home for the first time since the wedding. There was a foreclosure notice taped to the front door, and the yard that my mother had always kept immaculate was overgrown with weeds. A realtor's sign in the front yard advertised an upcoming auction. I felt a complex mix of emotions looking at the house where I'd grown up. Sadness for the memories that had been tainted by recent events, anger at the choices that had led to this moment, and something that might have been relief that this chapter of my life was finally closing. My phone rang as I sat in my car looking at the house. It was Sophie, calling with news that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's situation. Lily, you need to sit down. I just got off the phone with your cousin Jennifer, and she told me something that's going to blow your mind. What now? Your parents weren't actually facing foreclosure before all this happened. They weren't even behind on their mortgage payments. I felt the world shift around me. What do you mean? Jennifer works at the title company that handles mortgages for your parents' neighborhood. She looked up their account after the arrests, thinking she might be able to help somehow. Their mortgage was current through last month. They had equity in the house. They weren't about to lose anything. The implications hit me like a physical blow. So the whole story about the business failing and facing bankruptcy was probably a lie to justify stealing from you and everyone else. Jennifer thinks your dad was gambling or had some other financial problem he was hiding from everyone, including your mom. I hung up the phone and sat in my car, staring at the house that represented everything I thought I'd understood about my family's situation. They hadn't stolen from me out of desperation. They hadn't been facing financial ruin. They had simply decided that taking my money was easier than solving whatever their real problems were. The betrayal felt fresh all over again, deeper and more painful than when I'd first learned about the theft. At least then I'd been able to tell myself that they were desperate people making terrible choices in a crisis. Now I had to face the possibility that they were simply criminals who had used my love for them as a cover for their crimes. When I got home, I found Ryan in his office working on his laptop. Alex was on a video call, and both of them looked up when I walked in. "Perfect timing," Alex said. "I just finished tracing the last of the financial transactions, and you're going to want to hear this." "More bad news?" I asked, settling into the chair next to Ryan. "Depends on how you look at it. I found where the money really went." Alex shared his screen, showing a complex flowchart of financial transactions spanning the past year. Red lines connected Dennis's accounts to various casinos in Nevada and California, dating back to long before his business supposedly started failing. "Your father has a serious gambling problem," Alex explained. "He's been taking casino trips twice a month for the past 18 months, losing thousands of dollars each time. The business wasn't failing because of the economy or competition. It was failing because he was stealing from it to fund his gambling addiction. The evidence was overwhelming. Hotel bills from Reno and Las Vegas, cash advances from casino ATMs, even loyalty program records showing the frequency of his visits. The wedding money, your savings, the money he borrowed from other family members, it all went to casinos within days of being stolen," Alex continued. "He wasn't trying to save the business. He was trying to win back what he'd already lost gambling." Ryan reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Lily. I know this makes it worse somehow." He was right. Learning that my father had stolen from me to fund a gambling addiction felt worse than believing he'd stolen out of desperation to save his livelihood. It made every conversation we'd had about family loyalty and understanding seem like manipulation designed to protect his addiction rather than his business. But it also explained something that had been bothering me about his behavior during our confrontations. The casual way he demanded my understanding, the entitlement in his voice when he'd said I owed him my support. These were the attitudes of an addict who believed the world owed him whatever he needed to continue his destructive behavior. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold December morning, exactly 2 months after our return from Greece. The courtroom was packed with family members and friends, split between those who supported my decision to press charges and those who still believed I should have handled things privately. I delivered a victim impact statement that I'd spent weeks writing and rewriting, trying to capture not just the financial damage but the emotional cost of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. "Your Honor, the defendants didn't just steal money from me. They stole my ability to trust the people I love most. They stole my sense of security in my own family. They planned this theft while watching me plan my wedding, and they executed it while I was on my honeymoon, celebrating what should have been the happiest time of my life." I looked directly at my father as I continued. "The defendant has shown no genuine remorse for his actions, no understanding of the pain he's caused, and no indication that he wouldn't do this again if given the opportunity. He has blamed everyone except himself for the consequences of his choices." The judge sentenced Dennis to 3 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. Marcus received 2 years with the possibility of serving the final year under house arrest if he maintained good behavior and completed addiction counseling. As they were led away in handcuffs, my father looked back at me one final time. I thought he might try to mouth an apology or show some sign of regret. Instead, he just shook his head, as if I were the one who had disappointed him. That night, Ryan and I celebrated quietly at home with a bottle of champagne and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. It felt strange to celebrate the end of something so painful, but there was relief in knowing that the legal process was finally over. "So what happens now?" Ryan asked as we sat on our couch, watching snow fall outside our window. "Now we rebuild," I said. "We get our money back, we plan for the future, and we decide what kind of family we want to create together." Any thoughts on that last part? I smiled, thinking about the lessons I'd learned over the past few months about the difference between family loyalty and family dysfunction. I think we create the kind of family where love doesn't require you to accept abuse, where loyalty doesn't mean covering up crimes, and where trust is earned rather than assumed. That sounds perfect to me. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about how much had changed since our wedding day. I'd lost the family I thought I had, but I'd gained something more valuable: a clear understanding of what real love and loyalty looked like, and the strength to demand nothing less than what I deserved. Spring arrived in Portland with an explosion of cherry blossoms and the kind of fresh green that made you remember why people fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. Ryan and I were sitting on the deck of our new house, a charming 1920s bungalow in the Hawthorne district that we'd been able to purchase 6 months earlier than planned, thanks to the restitution payments that had finally come through. The house hunting process had been therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Looking at potential homes with Ryan, imagining our future in each space, had helped me rebuild my sense of what family could look like when it was based on choice rather than obligation. We'd chosen this particular house because of its large kitchen, perfect for hosting the kind of dinner parties where friends became family, and its beautiful garden where we could grow something new together. I was grading a stack of 4th grade math tests when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Lily? This is Tom Bradley. I'm a counselor at the minimum security facility where your father is serving his sentence." My pen stopped moving across the test paper I was grading. Dennis had been transferred to the federal facility near Salem 4 months earlier, and this was the first contact I'd had with anyone there. "Is everything okay?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why his well-being should concern me. "Your father is doing well physically, but he's been asking to speak with you. He's participating in our addiction recovery program and has requested permission to write you a letter as part of his step-making amends process." I set down my pen entirely, feeling Ryan's eyes on me from across the deck where he was reading a cybersecurity journal. "I'm not sure that's something I'm interested in," I said honestly. Tom's voice was gentle but professional. "I understand your hesitation, and you're under no obligation to participate. However, I want you to know that your father has made significant progress in understanding the impact of his gambling addiction on his family. The letter isn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. It's an acknowledgement of responsibility and an attempt to provide closure. Can I think about it?" "Of course. If you decide you're willing to receive the letter, I can forward it to you. If not, we'll note your decision and respect your boundaries." After I hung up, Ryan closed his journal and looked at me with the kind of patient attention that had become one of my favorite things about him. "Prison counselor," I explained. "Dad wants to write me a letter as part of some addiction recovery program. How do you feel about that?" It was such a Ryan question, never telling me what I should feel but creating space for me to figure it out myself. Curious, I think. But also worried that it's just another manipulation. What if this whole recovery thing is just an act to try to get early parole or something? What if it is? Would reading a letter from him change anything about your life? Or your decisions? I thought about that as I watched a neighbor walking her dog past our front gate. The woman waved, and I waved back, still marveling at how normal and peaceful our life had become. No, I realized. It wouldn't change anything. I'm not going to suddenly trust him again or invite him back into my life. But maybe it would help me understand what was really going on in his head during all of this. 2 weeks later, the letter arrived in a plain white envelope with the prison's return address stamped in black ink. I carried it inside and set it on our kitchen counter, where it sat for 3 days while I decided whether to open it. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I opened it while Ryan made coffee and gave me space to process whatever was inside. The letter was handwritten on standard lined paper, Dennis's familiar script, more careful and deliberate than I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists of my childhood. "Dear Lily," it began. "I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect anything from you if you do. Tom says that part of recovery is acknowledging the harm I've caused without expecting forgiveness or reconciliation, so that's what I'm trying to do here." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his gambling addiction with a level of honesty I'd never heard from him before. He explained how it had started with occasional casino trips during business slow periods, how it had escalated when he'd hit a few big wins early on, and how it had eventually consumed his ability to think rationally about money or consequences. I told myself I was borrowing from family members temporarily, that I would pay everyone back as soon as I hit the big win that would solve everything. I convinced myself that taking your wedding money was justified because I was going to double it and give you back more than I'd taken. I know how insane that sounds now, but at the time, it felt logical. The most painful part came near the end. "I want you to know that your decision to press charges probably saved my life. If you had covered for me the way I expected you to, I would have continued gambling until I lost everything and everyone. I would have found new ways to steal, new family members to manipulate, new lies to tell. The only reason I'm getting help now is because you were strong enough to hold me accountable when I couldn't hold myself accountable." He ended with an acknowledgement that felt more genuine than anything he'd said during our confrontations. "I know I destroyed your ability to trust me, and I know there's no going back from that. I'm not asking for another chance. I'm just asking that you know the truth about what happened and why it happened. You deserved better from me, and I'm sorry that my addiction made me incapable of giving you what you deserved." I folded the letter carefully and sat quietly for a long time, watching the morning light move across our kitchen walls. Ryan brought me a cup of coffee and sat beside me without asking questions. "He sounds different," I said finally. "How so?" "More honest. Less manipulative. He's not trying to make me feel guilty or asking for anything." "How does that make you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Sad, I think. Sad that it took going to prison for him to be honest with me. Sad that his addiction was so powerful that he was willing to destroy his relationship with his children to feed it. But also relieved to finally understand what was really happening." "Does it change anything for you?" "No. I'm glad he's getting help, and I hope he stays sober when he gets out. But I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship with him. I've built something better." That afternoon, we drove to Sophie's house for a barbecue with the group of friends who had become our chosen family over the past year. Sophie and her partner Maria were hosting, along with Alex and his wife, and several colleagues from Ryan's company who had become close friends. As we sat around Sophie's backyard, eating grilled vegetables and watching Alex's twin daughters play on the swing set, I felt a deep sense of contentment that I'd never experienced during family gatherings with my parents. There was no underlying tension, no walking on eggshells around anyone's mood, no unspoken resentment simmering beneath polite conversation. "Lily, you look like someone who's figured something out," Sophie observed, refilling my glass of sangria. "I think I have. I got a letter from my father this week, and it made me realize how much my life has improved since I stopped trying to manage his dysfunction." Alex looked up from where he was pushing his daughters on the swings. "Any regrets about how you handled everything?" "None. Well, maybe one. I regret that it took me so long to recognize that family loyalty doesn't mean accepting abuse." "That's a hard lesson to learn," Maria said gently. "Especially when you're raised to believe that family comes first no matter what." "The thing is, family does come first," I said, looking around at the faces of people who had supported me unconditionally through the hardest year of my life. "It's just that family isn't always the people you share DNA with." That evening, Ryan and I walked through our neighborhood as the sun set behind the West Hills. We'd developed this habit over the past few months, using the time to decompress from our days and plan for our future. "I've been thinking about something," Ryan said as we paused to admire a neighbor's rose garden. "What would you think about us starting to try for kids next year?" The question caught me by surprise, not because we hadn't talked about children before, but because I realized how much my perspective on parenthood had changed over the past year. "I think I'd like that," I said slowly. "But I want to make sure we do it differently than how I was raised." "What do you mean?" "I want our kids to know that love isn't conditional on their behavior or their willingness to cover up our mistakes. I want them to understand that healthy families have boundaries, and that accountability isn't betrayal." Ryan smiled, pulling me closer as we continued walking. "I think we can manage that. I also want them to know their grandfather exists but that they won't have a relationship with him unless and until he proves he's genuinely changed. I'm not exposing our children to someone who sees family members as resources to be exploited." "That seems fair. What about your mother?" That was a more complicated question. Carol had written me several letters over the past year, each one cycling through anger, guilt trips, and eventually something that might have been acceptance. She'd moved to a small apartment in Bend after losing the house, and according to my cousin Jennifer, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. I don't know yet. She wasn't the one who stole from me, but she enabled it and tried to manipulate me into covering for it. I need to see how she handles Dad's recovery and whether she's willing to acknowledge her role in what happened. No rush on deciding. We've got time to figure it out. That summer, we took a vacation to Italy, partially because we'd always wanted to see Rome and partially because we wanted to replace our Greek honeymoon memories with new travel experiences that weren't overshadowed by family trauma. We spent 2 weeks wandering through ancient ruins, eating incredible food, and talking about our dreams for the future. On our last night in Rome, we were having dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city when Ryan brought up something that had been on his mind. "I've been thinking about your dad's letter and about forgiveness," he said, twirling pasta around his fork. "What about it?" "I think there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation that most people don't understand. You can forgive someone for your own peace of mind without letting them back into your life." I considered this as I watched the sunset paint the Roman skyline in shades of gold and pink. I think you're right. I don't hate my father anymore. I understand that he was sick, and I hope he gets better. But understanding and forgiveness don't mean I have to expose myself to being hurt by him again. Exactly. Forgiveness can be a gift you give yourself, not something you owe someone else. When we returned to Portland, I wrote a letter to Tom Bradley, the prison counselor. I thanked him for facilitating Dennis's letter and asked him to pass along a message. Please tell my father that I acknowledge his apology and I'm glad he's getting help. I hope he continues his recovery when he's released. However, I won't be maintaining contact with him or including him in my life going forward. This isn't out of anger, but out of self-protection and respect for the family I'm building with my husband. I wish him well, but from a distance. Fall brought news that Marcus had completed his sentence and was living in Seattle, working for a tech company. And apparently doing well. He'd sent a brief email asking if we could meet for coffee to talk, but I declined. Like with Dennis, I was glad he was rebuilding his life, but I had no interest in giving him access to mine. The first anniversary of our wedding arrived with a gentle October rain that reminded me of our original ceremony. Ryan and I celebrated quietly, looking through our photo album and marveling at how young and naive we looked in pictures taken just 12 months earlier. Do you ever wonder how things would have turned out if your parents hadn't stolen from us? Ryan asked as we curled up on our couch with a bottle of the same wine we'd served at our reception. Sometimes. But honestly, I think we're better. For having gone through it. It tested us in ways that most newlyweds don't get tested, and we came through it stronger. How so? We learned how to face a crisis together. We learned how to support each other through something really difficult. And we learned that we can count on each other even when everyone else lets us down. Ryan raised his glass in a toast. To surviving our first year of marriage and everything it threw at us. To building something better than what we came from, I added. That winter, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother, who was now 87 and still sharp as ever. She'd maintained occasional contact throughout the legal proceedings, always supportive of my decision to hold Dennis accountable. Lily, dear, I wanted to let you know that your father called me yesterday. He's been approved for early release and will be getting out next month. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but it was milder than I'd expected. How do you feel about that, Grandma? Cautiously optimistic. He sounds different, more humble. But I've told him that if he wants any relationship with this family going forward, he needs to prove he's genuinely changed. No more empty promises or manipulation. What did he say to that? He said he understood and that he didn't expect anyone to trust him until he'd earned it back. We'll see if his actions match his words. After I hung up, I realized that Dennis's impending release didn't frighten me the way it might have a year earlier. I'd built a life that was completely separate from his dysfunction, surrounded by people who loved me without conditions or expectations. Whatever choices he made going forward, they couldn't touch the peace I'd found. Spring returned to Portland. With its annual promise of renewal, and with it came news that my mother had enrolled in family therapy to address her role in enabling Dennis's addiction. She sent a letter explaining that she was learning about codependency and wanted to understand how her behavior had contributed to the family's dysfunction. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to insert myself back into your life, she wrote. I just want you to know that I'm working on becoming the kind of person who supports healthy relationships rather than destructive ones. I showed the letter to Ryan, who read it thoughtfully. What do you think? I asked. I think. It sounds promising, but I also think you should trust your instincts about whether and when to respond. My instincts say to wait. Let her do the work for herself first, without any expectation that I'll reward her efforts with access to our life. That sounds wise. That summer, Ryan and I found out we were expecting our first child. The pregnancy had been planned and hoped for, but the reality of it still felt magical in a way that caught us both by surprise. As I sat in the doctor's office looking at the first ultrasound image of our baby, I felt a fierce protectiveness that made me understand, perhaps for the first time, why some people stay trapped in dysfunctional family systems. The love I felt for this tiny cluster of cells was so overwhelming that I could imagine doing almost anything to protect them. But I could also imagine teaching this child about healthy boundaries, about the difference between love and manipulation, about the importance of choosing relationships that nourish rather than drain you. This baby would grow up knowing that family meant safety and support, not exploitation and guilt. Have you thought about whether you want your parents to know about the pregnancy? Ryan asked as we drove home from the appointment. I think I'll tell my grandmother and let her decide whether to share the information with anyone else. I don't want to be cruel, but I also don't want to open a door that I'm not ready to walk through. And if they reach out directly? Then I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But our child's safety and our family's peace come first. The baby was born on a snowy February morning, a healthy daughter we named Elena Sofia Martinez. Holding her in my arms for the first time, I felt a completeness that I'd never experienced before. This was what family was supposed to feel like: unconditional love, protection, and the promise of building something beautiful together. Sophie and Maria were our first visitors, followed by Alex and his family, then Ryan's parents who had flown in from San Antonio. Our hospital room was filled with flowers and laughter, with people who had earned their place in our lives through consistency and love. "She's perfect," Sophie said, holding Elena with the practiced ease of someone who had younger siblings. "Look at those tiny fingers. She's going to be so loved," Maria added, and I knew it was true. Elena would grow up surrounded by chosen family who would celebrate her successes and support her through challenges without expecting anything in return. When Elena was 3 months old, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a simple congratulations note and a small silver rattle, along with a brief message in my father's handwriting. "Congratulations on your daughter. I hope she brings you all the joy you deserve. I understand that I won't be part of her life, and I accept that as a consequence of my choices. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of the mother you've become and the family you've built." I showed the card to Ryan, who read it while bouncing Elena gently in his arms. "How does that make you feel?" he asked. "Sad but not angry. I think he really has changed, at least somewhat. But change doesn't erase consequences, and it doesn't automatically restore trust. What do you want to do with the rattle?" I looked at the small silver object, beautifully crafted and clearly expensive. It was probably bought with money he'd earned honestly, part of his attempt to make amends in the only way he could. "I think I'll keep it in Elena's baby book with the card. Someday, when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her the story of her grandfather who loved her enough to respect the boundaries her parents set to protect her." As Elena grew from baby to toddler, our life settled into the kind of peaceful rhythm I'd never experienced growing up. Ryan and I both worked flexible schedules that allowed us to share parenting duties, and our chosen family provided the kind of support network that made everything easier. Elena's first word was "Mama," quickly followed by "Dada" and "Sophie," much to Sophie's delight. She was a happy, curious child who seemed to absorb the security and love that surrounded her like sunlight. On Elena's second birthday, we threw a party in our backyard, stringing lights between the trees and setting up tables loaded with food that friends had brought to share. As I watched our daughter toddle between the adults who adored her, all of them people who had chosen to be part of our family, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had led us here. "Penny for your thoughts," Ryan said, slipping his arm around my waist as we watched Elena blow out her candles with help from Alex's daughters. "I was just thinking about how different this is from the birthday parties I remember as a kid. All the stress about impressing people, all the underlying tensions between family members, all the walking on eggshells to avoid setting someone off. And how does this compare? This feels like pure joy. Just people who love each other, celebrating something wonderful together. That's what we wanted to build, isn't it?" "It is. And I think we've succeeded." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and Elena was asleep in her crib, Ryan and I sat on our back deck with glasses of wine, watching the stars appear in the clear Oregon sky. "I got an email from Tom Bradley today," I said. "Dennis is doing well in his outpatient program and has been sober for 2 years now. How do you feel about that?" It was still Ryan's favorite question, and I'd grown to love the space it created for me to examine my emotions without judgment. "Happy for him, I think. Recovery is hard work, and I'm glad he's committed to it. But it doesn't change anything for us. Do you think you'll ever want Elena to know him?" I considered the question as I had many times over the past 2 years. Maybe someday, if he continues his recovery and if Elena expresses interest when she's old enough to understand the whole story. But not until I'm completely confident that he wouldn't use a relationship with her to try to manipulate his way back into our lives. That seems fair. And if that day never comes? Then Elena will grow up knowing she has grandparents who love her unconditionally, I said, thinking of Ryan's parents, who had embraced both me and Elena with warmth and acceptance. She'll know what healthy family relationships look like, and she'll never have to wonder whether love comes with conditions or hidden costs. She's lucky to have you as a mother. She's lucky to have us as parents. And she's lucky to be growing up in a family where love means protection, not exploitation. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been a young woman desperate for her family's approval, willing to accept less than she deserved in order to maintain peace. The theft of my wedding money had been devastating at the time, but it had also been the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. I'd learned that real strength isn't about keeping the peace at any cost. It's about having the courage to demand what you deserve and the wisdom to walk away from people who can't or won't provide it. I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood but by the consistent choice to love and support each other through good times and bad. Most importantly, I'd learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is enabling someone else's dysfunction. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Elena would grow up knowing these truths not as hard-won lessons learned through pain, but as fundamental principles that shaped how our family operated. She would know that she was valued for who she was, not for what she could provide. She would understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect and that love never demands you compromise your safety or well-being. And if someday she faced her own challenges with difficult people, she would have the tools and the confidence to protect herself while still maintaining her capacity for love and trust with those who earned it. The Greek island where Ryan and I had first learned about the theft felt like a lifetime ago, but I could still remember the terror and confusion of that moment. Now, sitting in our own backyard with our sleeping daughter safe inside and a future full of possibility stretching ahead of us, I understood that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best transformations. My parents had stolen my money, but in fighting back, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. They had damaged my ability to trust blindly, but they had enhanced my ability to love wisely. They had forced me to choose between family, loyalty and self-respect, and in choosing myself, I had found the kind of family worth building. As Ryan and I finished our wine and prepared to go inside, I felt a profound sense of peace with the choices I'd made. Elena would never know the anxiety of walking on eggshells around people who claimed to love her. She would never have to choose between her own well-being and someone else's dysfunction. She would grow up secure in the knowledge that she was valued, protected, and free to become whoever she was meant to be. That, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give her, the knowledge that love should feel like safety, that family should feel like home, and that she would always have the right to demand nothing less than what she deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.